Welcome back to the After Dinner Leadership Podcast. I'm so pleased that you're here. As your business grows, you will also need to grow as a leader. And today's guest has been very open with me about the evolution that he has had to go through and has continued to go through as a leader. His name is Logan Naidu, and he is the founder and CEO of Kernel Group. He works in a very competitive landscape of recruitment, and he has, through his leadership, grown a phenomenal business and helped to place top-tier talent in some of the most influential organizations throughout the world. It was a really interesting conversation. We cover all sorts of different topics, including his faith. And what struck me most is his humility. And I'd love you to take a listen and just listen to the layers of what helps him to operate as an effective leader. Enjoy. And a special welcome to Logan Naidu of Kernel Group, the founder and CEO. Welcome, Logan, to the After Dinner Leadership Podcast.
Hey, Simon. Nice to be here.
That's great. Now, we've got this imaginary dinner table around us here. What food reminds you of your childhood?
I'm half Chinese. I'm half Chinese, half Indian. So probably noodles of some sort, and particularly Malaysian noodles would be the kind of childhood memory.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Any particular sauce that would conjure up your childhood associated with you?
No, I don't think so. There's a dish called char kway teow, which is kind of, like stir fry noodles with fish and fish balls and prawns and chicken. That would probably be one of my kind of lasting memories of the happier parts of my childhood.
Yeah, great. Logan, we haven't physically met before. I'm really pleased to have you here. We're kind of associated through other business contacts, but I have been not stalking you, but kind of following your presence on LinkedIn, and the growth of your organization is commendable, and I'm delighted to see the success that you've had. But I've also appreciated the style at which you have communicated your vision for the business as I've watched, and listened to you speak elsewhere, and I'm confident others will benefit from that. So we'll be talking about you as a leader and some of the lessons you've learned, I guess. But I would also like to just play back some of your history, which is what was memorable about you in your early 20s, would you say?
Almost nothing, Simon. I always say I ended up in this position, and I'm the poster child of the ability of hardworking average to go quite far in life. If we do ever meet, I'm not especially tall, sadly. I'm not especially funny or handsome or bright. But I think it's kind of moderately witty, and moderately likable along the way, and moderately intelligent. What I think you would have said about as a 20-year-old, very ambitious and very hardworking in certain instances. If I applied myself, that would have come across, I think, as a 20-year-old. And then, just to kind of fill out the gap, at 21, I came to faith. So I became a Christian at 21. And I'd hope that transition at 21, 22 started to, say, what made you stand out? That little bit of faith started to change me a little bit in terms of,
Yes,
I guess, who I was and how I treated people.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting perspective. I loved your little thought around when you said hardworking in certain circumstances. There's a backstory there that's probably worth exploring another day. But have you got any comment on that? I mean, it felt like selective.
It was selective, yeah. Let's put it the polite way. I think I had a couple jobs early on, and there may have been selective application.
Very good. All right. Well, let's dive into the questions I like to ask each guest, which is, what 3 leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier?
I guess I've been leading companies now for almost as long as I've worked, so since 2005, so 20 years this year. And the first thing that anyone, I don't know who the podcast is aimed at, potentially people who are thinking about leading or want to be leaders or want to be better leaders, it's relentlessly hard work, and the responsibility never goes away, always ends with you. And I think the idea of being a leader appeals to people's vanity and ego early on. And I think I'd say to, certainly my kids is, that Greek myth of Sisyphus pushing is it pushing a boulder or a stone up a mountain for his entire
Yes.
life and never making it? That's what leadership is. 20 years in, it doesn't change. You have periods where it goes a little bit better, periods where it goes, a lot better, and periods where it's just pushing that stone up a hill, but that never changes. So kind of strap in if that's the blessing that you're given as that of a leader. Um, the joy of leadership, I think that what makes it genuinely easy, and pleasurable is having the right team around you. Building that
Yeah.
team is so important. Um, and if I look at the team that's been the bedrock for our business along the way, I don't know if it was skill or just good luck and blessing, but we've managed to hire some really great people who stuck at it and with me through thick and thin, even when I was making some absolute howlers, they largely had my back, and certainly had my back publicly. So having the
Yeah.
right team in place is really, really important. Um, and then the other thing, I guess, if the company or the group grows, leadership does evolve and change, right? And what that means is very, very different over time. And so, just when you think you may have cracked it, something changes within the business that means that you need to develop and change alongside it. So, you know, slightly different points. The first one around it being relentless. The journey whilst you're working is never ending, right? And I think that bit's really important because I always say that I don't know when I'll cap out within the business. Like I would say maybe today's the last day of, as far as I can take the business and the group. But you've got to keep trying and keep pushing, right? And the day that I'm not up for that is probably the day for me to step down as a leader.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. So we got this, or maybe two ends of a spectrum, perhaps, or no, actually, they're combined. We've got this relentless hard work. There's joy, and the joy is in being around the right team, the right people, knowing people have got your back, and that leadership role will evolve as the organization grows. You have to grow. Is that,
Yeah,
have I
I think that's
captured that
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And um, one of the things that I'd love to do is just explore some of those in a bit more detail, but perhaps some context for those that don't know. Could you describe the nature of Kernel Group's work?
So we're a multi-brand, multi-niche recruitment group. We have three actual trading brands and a fourth one, which is a foundation focused on social mobility. And the first business I started was Dartmouth Partners, which is fairly well known in the city in private equity and advisory circles. We took PE backing in 2018 and then acquired a business called Pure in 2019. Launched a third business called Catalyst, which is HR and CPO focused. And we've been through a second round of private equity in 2023. So four offices globally, about 200 heads.
Yeah, amazing. So there's something in your second point around the right team is, what's the term, like drinking your own medicine, or selecting and recruiting the right talent for your own organization. I guess you've got a great view of the market to make sure you're selecting great people. But how have you gone about getting the right team in place? Would you say how
Yeah,
have you made that
look, you
happen?
would think we still make mistakes on this, and that's the thing that gives me slight hope, despite looming automation and AI hanging over our heads. Um, alchemy and serendipity plays a large part still on that. You can look, the best hires tend to be word of mouth hires, right? People who weren't necessarily looking. We were we hired or I hired 8 people on day one when we launched the business. Um, Most of whom I'd worked with before in some way, and a couple that I hadn't. And of the nine, including me, I think 6 or 7 are still here today, 13 years later. Right.
Wow.
So, I think we got something right in terms of picking that group of people, and they've all developed and grown in different ways, right? The CEO of Dartmouth was someone that had worked with me as a graduate for a couple of years and came across as a fairly junior hire. Um, Now, there's no question in my mind that she has been hardworking, and she's talented, and she's very bright. I'd hope that I've contributed something to helping her develop those skills. Um, how much I don't know. You'd have to ask her. Um, but yeah, she put in the work, and I think I helped channel some of that energy in terms of where it goes. And our COO, similar story, right? I hired him. He was the one that came from external. Um, but we spent a long time getting to know each other. We'd known each other for probably about 7, 8 years before we decided to kind of work together.
Yes.
I had a good feel for who he was as a person and his skill sets, and we'd catch up every year and do the dance around, what's the plan? And actually, I remember the final time we were doing it, I said, look, you know, I should ask the question. We catch up every year. I'm assuming the answer is no, but is there any merit in us having a conversation about you leaving and joining us? And it was right at the end when we were wrapping up, paying for lunch, and he said, "Oh, actually, yeah, I've been meaning to bring that up. Probably now's the time to have that conversation." So, I think where they can be a good sense that, and obviously hiring, usually you're hiring for a role that exists right now, so you don't really have this time, but kind of word of mouth referrals where someone thinks they'll be a good fit for you, or internal referrals, or the long, slow courtship around working out where you might fit in. I think those tend to be the best ones where you don't have the luxury of time. I think it plays a little bit into going with your gut instinct, which I'm sure lots of people will say, but just knowing that like sometimes you're going to get it wrong, right? And it doesn't mean that they're a bad person or you're a bad person. Sometimes the fit's just not good,
Yeah.
and mistakes do happen.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And it also, maybe tying the second and the third point together, what occurs for me is you're growing. Um, you talked about the evolution of your style or approach would have to change. You've grown the business and now group CEO. So how have you been able to retain talent in those transitions? Your role, your perspective will have had to have changed as you're managing this large organization rather than, for example, just Dartmouth partners.
Mm.
What have you noticed there?
I think, look, inherently, most people don't like change, right? And
Yeah.
so when you've got this change that happens where, I don't run one business anymore, or I go and run another business, or I run group, there's a shuffling of the pack in terms of reporting lines and, shift of tone and feel. Like, look, candidly, I think within Dartmouth, that transition went as almost as smoothly as it could have done. And I think, like, genuinely, I think part of it was after 10 years of hearing one voice. Um, Terry's been a breath of fresh air in that respect. Different style, obviously. She's definitely not a clone of me, but we think fairly similarly in lots of ways. But her, tone and style is different, right? And um, I think that's been useful for Dartmouth. I think also, I guess, candidly, the changing of the guard. Um, some of the renewed energy that she brings in terms of wanting to change things, that maybe she sort of said, look, that was the way that Logan did it, but I want this to be different. So
Yes.
with all those transitions, trying to kind of signpost and land the transition, and then trying to get out of the way and let it happen has been um useful. And it's not like I've disappeared out of the building, right? So where there are maybe a couple of people that are particularly close to me because I've brought them in early days and they've only ever reported into me, we need to navigate that carefully. And I've been around to grab coffee with them, or kind of assure them that it's going to be fine. But what I've tried to avoid being is the back channel for you know I think sometimes I have seen it happen where the ego of the leader still wants to be the person that gets called, even though they're no longer that leader. And so they're
Yes.
quietly taking people out for coffee or a drink or hovering in the background. It just undermines the succession plan. And it's always nice to feel wanted and to feel good. And you feel quite important when someone says, I must catch up with you and I really miss chatting to you. But it's undermining your own succession plan. So, I think the art and elegance of a good transition is knowing when to step out of the way and when to be helpful. I think we've done that relatively well. I think within I think also people appreciated that I was juggling quite a lot of balls, so things had to change. And in the
Yes.
transition into 2023, when we were doing the kind of run up to the second deal, um, I was kind of buried in doing the deal, right? That was a full-time job in itself, whilst trying to keep, the day job on the road. So we started to work towards that transition, even though it wasn't official, over, I guess, 6 months prior to that, where I think without ever stating it was going to happen, people kind of felt that was the most likely outcome
Yeah.
within that transition.
What level of client engagement would you have been getting involved in? How have you managed that transition? People wanting to speak to Logan, he's my man.
Yeah, it's really hard, right? That's the hardest bit in any sort of business services uh, firm where an owner manager starts a business because they're a good practitioner. Then how do you scale it? And there's plenty of books being written on that. We'd started to kind of get beyond. I remember it being quite encouraging when we started to see clients like, I've never met these clients, never heard of these clients. They start to come through the door, and that's become more and more the case. We have many more clients than I could possibly speak to. Um, Again, transitioning the job, right? I started the business because I loved that part of the job. I loved being a transactor, loved being in the market, loved being able to walk into a coffee shop and say hello to five people in the West End, all that kind of stuff. Um, it took us 6-ish years to start to pull me away from clients. Again, interesting. What it did is allowed everyone to step up and just exhale and breathe, because everyone stopped coming to me for the answer and started to be able to figure it out themselves, or get to the answer themselves. Interestingly, in the last 18 months, 2 years, I've kind of started to dip my toe into a few of the key clients where it's been useful for just making sure that I'm still relevant in the market, so I can talk with some, uh, I guess, authority still, and I'm not sitting in an ivory tower or in a glass box away from everyone. Everyone can say, "Oh, the market's really tough," and I just go, "No, crack on, it can't be that hard." So that's been, but the that transition happened around about year 6, year 7,
Mhm.
when we got to about, I don't know, 50-ish people, and there were just too many moving parts within the business to allow me to carry on doing, you know, wearing both hats.
Yeah, great. So there's this return you've mentioned. Is there anything else that you would say you're in the evolution of at the moment?
All of it's evolution, isn't it? Because if you're not, it's not necessarily always going forwards, but these businesses and people-based businesses, and most businesses are people-based businesses, they're organic, right? You kind of breathe in, breathe out all the time. People peel off, new people
Yes.
come in. Some people come with fresh ideas, some people don't. You hire some great culture carriers, you hire some bad culture carriers. So the group is always evolving. I think one of the hard things I was catching up with, I was doing my one-to-one with Terry this morning. Some of the challenges that you've got. I make no. This is not my maybe it will become it, but this is not a judgment piece, but some of the culture wars you have within work at the moment around what people think work should be. Um, we were discussing, and she was saying that it's so different to how it was in 2019, right? You would have the kind of um, thought process of broadly 99.5% of the population. If I get a job, I expect to come to the office 5 days a week, and that was the kind of untold transaction or unsaid transaction. It was assumed. Um, that has made our business harder um, to run. I think other things, right? Everyone's so, again, possibly post-COVID, possibly a generational thing, which was happening anyway. But everyone's so quick to point the finger and so quick to say, it's my truth rather than is there a truth? I think rightly, so maybe this is a judgment piece, but I tend to think that there's generally a singular truth, right? As in, not always in business is there only one singular best way of doing things. You could sometimes have multiple options, and sometimes a couple work out. But trying to lead means trying to find the one path. You have to make decisions, right? And so
Yeah.
again, some of the challenges in the workplace that have existed, I don't have to go completely off topic now, but post COVID of, and I think that leadership piece is trying to create a framework and a narrative for people to hang their hat on and park. Rather than having 200 different stories and we all have our own individual story, how do we latch on to this is the one story that I'm working towards whilst I operate within within the business. Otherwise, you've got,
Yeah.
borderline chaos, haven't you? Everyone's just
Yeah.
off doing their own thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Trying to get some alignment between those things can be a real challenge on that scale. Absolutely. Well, I'm I'm interested to explore something you mentioned earlier. You said in your early 20s you came to faith, and what role has that played in your style of leadership? You've hinted at that. I'd love to kind of get a sense of whether you feel it's significantly impacted the way which you lead.
That's a really interesting look. I'd hope so, because at the end of the day, you know, I I know I'll be judged. I won't be judged, or uh, I won't be saved through my actions. I believe I'm saved through my faith, right? But I will be judged on my actions and my behaviours. Look, in my 20s when I came to faith, I was still a young man. So, I think the things that I would say, I was still growing up as an adult. And so some of my hot-headedness um, was definitely there, and my impatience was definitely there. And that's part of my DNA. Over the course of working life, I think, some of those harder edges get rounded off you. Marriage certainly helps. Being a parent certainly helps. You see the best and worst of yourself in those instances. But I think also my faith has given me, hopefully, you know, uh, some guiding principles on how to treat others and how to operate, and how also what's ultimately very important to me. I think that I used to walk past this when I lived in Oval, and used to walk past Kennington Tube, and there's a big church on the way in, and there'd be Mark 8:36 on a board out there, and every day for 3 years I walked past that. Said, "For what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world yet lose his own soul?" And that has sort of stuck in my mind the whole time that we've been building this business. We've built uh, a really great business. We've traded a couple of times. It's made uh, the shareholders and the employees a lot of money along the way. But ultimately, if you can't walk down the street and be willing to hold your head up high and shake someone's hand that you used to work with, then you've probably done something wrong. We haven't, been perfect in that. We've made mistakes along the way. Quite often, when you've got tricky individuals, and we haven't talked about what to do when you get it wrong, it can be quite tense. As you get bigger, I think more people try to take advantage of the system in terms of employment law and looking for payouts, and being willing to cry wolf, and that always stings a little bit. Um, but I'd hope, on balance, that more often than not, would people say that actually we've created a pretty decent place to work. Not an easy place to work, right? Our bar for what
Yeah.
success looks like is really high, and I'm really open about that. I would say, look, I'm not easy on people. My expectations out of where I think good performance is definitely higher than most of the industry. My expectations in terms of how we carry ourselves as individuals and as teams is definitely higher than the rest of the industry, and the bar in the industry is obviously pretty low given its reputation. But I view myself, and I want us to be the good guys in terms of how we conduct both ourselves and our business. You can lose trust and reputation so quickly. So trying to um, carry yourself in a good, honourable way is really, really important from a professional sense and a personal sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
so I think that hopefully those kind of characteristics of what people, if you ask from the floor, go, yeah, I could see that, even if everyone didn't necessarily know that I was a Christian.
Yeah. And it occurs to me that it is an area that can be quite tricky to bring into the workplace. We speak about authenticity and bringing faith as part of the authentic self. Sometimes can feel in a UK culture there's something a little bit alien, and even on LinkedIn, I've seen comments before, like if someone's got, even a broadly this kind of spiritual connotation to a comment, sometimes in the chat it's like, this isn't what LinkedIn's about, that kind of thing. And I just wonder your thoughts on, what do you bring to work? What do you leave outside? That, like, is there an element of a mask and all those kind of? I'm speaking perhaps through my own lens here, that occasions it's like it's not something I've always articulated out loud,
Yeah.
even though I feel it deeply in my heart because social stigmas or whatever it might be in the space. Any thoughts on
Yeah.
that? It was a long
I've
question.
got plenty of thoughts on it. Look, I think it is hard, isn't it? It is hard. It's always been hard. I think, I think it has gotten harder maybe in the last 12 months, 6 months. It's getting a little bit easier because of what's going on in America. Um, but I think, look, I'm called to be salt and light in the world and in the workplace, right? How I behave and how I act, and gently sharing, you know, the gospel and the good news. I try not to ram it down people's throats. If people ask me a question, I'll try and share, where my belief system comes from and why I think like that. Um,
Yes.
if people want to ask further questions, they're open to. I try and I guess gently sprinkle bits and pieces of wisdom. Obviously, my wisdom comes from the Bible, right? So, um, most of what I say is outside of recruitment wisdom. World wisdom comes from that book, and therefore I point people back to it a little bit in terms of saying, look, this is where that comes from. Some people pick up on it, some people don't, right? And that's completely fine. You've had, I try to. It's actually that has gotten harder post COVID, but we used to open up our house for dinners and try and invite people over for dinner, and you know, um, not always with a Christian angle, but sometimes have just say look kind of a light conversation around whatever it might be
Yeah.
and see where it goes. And so uh, I think look, the thing I guess from a personal point of view, have I treated people well? I hope so. It's not always easy, right? And then secondly, how do you know, I talk about quite often at the end of the year when we do our Christmas address, we always make mistakes, right? And I always link this to Christmas and say, look, we make mistakes, and Christmas is a great time where for Christians we remember that you know Jesus was sent in the world to bring forgiveness for those mistakes. And whether you believe that or not, that's what Christians will be celebrating. And so as
Yeah.
we look at our year that's just gone past, there'll be a ton of mistakes that people have made, right? But at the end of the year is a good time to try and be at peace with them and
I like that.
forgive people for the mistakes. And most years that lands. A couple of years ago, people made a few complaints about it, saying it felt a bit heavy-handed. I say the same thing every year, so it's just interesting how it lands and doesn't land. But that look, being on an entrepreneurial business, we're going to make some mistakes, right? Being a people-based business, we're going to make mistakes, and so again, in a world where people are very quick to point the finger at others and accuse them or throw stones at glass houses and all that kind of stuff, I'd hope that we try and have some grace with how, certainly on an individual basis, people make mistakes, and then on a corporate basis, again, I tend to think it's good practice and good business at the same time, right? If you want an environment where people are willing to roll the dice and try things all the time and iterate and pivot and fall over and get up and try again, you need to have a forgiving environment and make a mistake. I'd rather you tried and failed than didn't try at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that insight and perspective. That's inspiring for me. Thank you. And changing tack a little bit, we've got this hard work, got the team, got this evolution. Are we noticing anything in your sector where AI is threatening to take the jobs of executive search consultants and the like?
I mean, look, it's here, it's coming, and look, my sense is, and we've got our summer party coming up in what, a month's time, just over a month's time, and so um, I was planning to talk about it then. Our industry is always ripe for disruption, right? There's an awful lot of manual stuff that happens. I think if your value proposition is CV matching, or I'm really good at searching LinkedIn, I think you're a woolly mammoth about to become extinct at some point in the next 5 or 10 years, and I don't know when, probably sooner than you think.
Yes.
Um, if you a quick positive history of our industry, 20 plus years ago, probably when we were kind of first working, the kind of the dark art of headhunting and recruitment was finding names, right, and gathering data. And I remember trying to go to TM Lewin's and Canary Wharf, and if you're buying a shirt, have a quick look through drop your card in, see who may have dropped the card, and see if there's anyone that you might not know in there that you can call. LinkedIn democratized a lot of that data, not all of it, but most people have a profile of some sort, right?
Yeah.
So it democratized access. What what TA has done and offshoring some of this has kind of taken, you can approach people on LinkedIn. What if your value proposition is that I'm really good on LinkedIn, then you've got a problem. If your value proposition is that I have and hold proprietary data and information about people that you don't have, right? Whether if you're a hiring organization, I think will still survive, right? But it's almost going back to how it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. When you think about, like, what am I getting paid to do? And it just extracts good people that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. Where I think the industry's got a real problem, a lot of this blue collar stuff where you're booking someone for a shift, as an example, right? So I always use this example. I think it's potentially true, but booking, if you're an education recruiter and you're trying to get someone to fill a locum in, the job goes out and you call everyone who might be a geography teacher as quickly as possible, and you just need to put them in for a shift for 2 weeks or a week or whatever it is. I think a lot of that could get automated out by AI because it's just matching. You're not looking for the
Yes.
best. You're not looking for the best geography teacher to be a locum for the next 3 days. You're looking for someone to handhold a slot quickly. Similar to maybe nursing and cleaning, and I think there's a lot of jobs where you're booking a shift that I think could get automated by AI at some point.
Yeah. That's interesting. And from a candidate's view, how do you stand out if things are automated? I can anticipate, if everyone's using some large language model to generate their CV, to work through the algorithms, you end up like LLMs talking to LLMs, and like the human in it. It's like, how do they stand out? It's like, do you get what I mean? It's like you've just got these computers talking, and where's the human dynamic in that?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, look, you can tell when you still can tell, right? It's this stuff's pretty amazing at quite an early stage, but you can still tell when it's a AI generated or a bot, and we're getting interestingly. Look, I think our species is amazing, right? Uh, Adaptation, learning, evolving really quickly, actually. And I
Yes.
think we our sense of when this is AI generated now, you can read something and go, no, that wasn't written by them, and very quickly we can tune into this. Um, and so again, I think the value of human interaction is so hard to replace. If you pick another world, right? The dating game, in terms of how much data you can put online about yourself and the algorithm that sits behind it and matching. And I've not been on a dating app ever because I'm ancient, but the kind of the the kind of chemistry to make it work is so human, right? And
Yeah.
so particularly human around uh, you know what your journey to the date was like, and the weather, and your day that day, and the commute, and how someone landed the first joke, or their smell, and all that kind of stuff. That that's the magic, right? that's
Yeah.
that's the magic. And I talked about alchemy earlier on. I think that's the magic in the workplace sometimes as well, right? Just you know what you can't govern for, no matter how brilliant. Like, if someone can build momentum really, really quickly, then the confidence that goes with that when they land in a job, right? And I think that's similar to dating in lots of ways as well, right? Or football managers, right? I always think about, look at Man United, the state Man United are in, and you just think David Moyes is probably the best manager they've had since Ferguson. Did a great job last season at my club Everton, and I look at that, and if he just landed a little bit faster, right, and had a slightly better start, might still be there, right, being the next
Yeah.
Fergie.
Yeah. You're
So
right. Yeah.
I think look, AI is an existential threat um, for lots of things, but also don't underestimate the ability for the human race to adapt and learn as well.
I've got a lot of affinity with that as well. I think it's a big lesson from COVID. Um, the power of that human in person connection is just so rich, and it's not the same. I mean, enjoying this conversation over digital means that we're having now facilitates it extremely well. But the possibility of being in an actual physical room with you would be so much richer. You see, you feel, you sense, you see things that you are missing. Including your feet, for example, so when you're talking over these things. So I totally concur with that, and that ability. I love that idea of the adaptability of the human species. Okay, there will be certain jobs that will stop, in my view, that will be replaced, but others will be created that we don't know yet and haven't seen in action, because people will be resourceful and adaptable.
Yeah. Look, and I
Yeah,
think we've been kind of predicting the decline of humanity and work since the Industrial Revolution, haven't we?
absolutely. Yeah,
Um, and it's really interesting. I read a book, I can't remember what it's
yeah.
called. It's called 200 Years of Muddling Through. But I think a guy called Duncan Weldon who talks about, our economy for the last 200 odd years and that move from the dark ages and how hard we had to work pre-industrialization. And it was probably you were working 7 days a week, right? And then to 6 days and then 5 days. But productivity spikes post-industrial revolution. I think AI might lead to another productivity spike, but sadly, I don't think we're all going to be suddenly sunning ourselves on the beach for 4 days a week and then checking in with the bot for the next 2 days. I think we're going to be still
No.
working pretty hard.
Yeah, I agree. And there's some fulfillment. As much you talked about relentless hard work, you also talked about joy. And if you can find joy in the work that you do, there's something really powerful about that. I mean, of course, remuneration's one aspect of it, but the fulfillment and
I completely,
finding purpose
I
is
completely agree with that. I think that
yeah,
I actually think people overestimate the importance of remuneration. Actually, I think that
right.
they, on the basis that if you take what we recruit for, which is largely white collar professional services, and say, comp within range, maybe say top to bottom 10-15%. The comp is not the marker for whether you feel like you're flourishing, right? Typically, you want to be the idea that you're good at something and you're working with a team that feels like they're going forwards. That is
Yeah,
so powerful, right? And the sense of pride and joy when things are going well, sense of pride and joy when you've had a breakthrough when things have been hard and you've got through the other side. Um,
yes,
I think that is really important. Being proud of what you do, regardless of what it is, right? And then the second bit um, is probably, actually, I call it fun, but I don't mean fun kind of going out drinking. The fun of winning, right? The fun of feeling like we're
yeah,
actually making progress. I think that's really really important. Um, then I think the third part might be the comps and bends bit, but I actually genuinely think it's the probably the least important component of that. People will die for a cause they believe in, right? You look at
yeah,
people going to war, they'll fight for their country for nothing, right? And give up their life, for their faith or for their country, if they have a mission, right? And so,
yeah,
I think quite often we think the mission is pay packet when it's not.
yeah. Agreed. I love Daniel Pink's work. I did this book Drive. He talked about purpose, autonomy, mastery as being these kind of core motivators, and you touched on that. Hey, there is a couple of things I want to speak about. But you talked about the foundation a little earlier, and it just seems like a nice link in terms of the purpose. You've got these let's call them profit centers for your group, but you've also got this foundation. Could you tell us a little bit about that and the work you're doing there?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we want a thing called Classroom Support and Fund Foundation, which stemmed off the back of we have this classroom to boardroom model within Dartmouth, which is early stage talent becomes your future leaders who become your hiring managers. So we focused on we focused on junior hiring, and then more as they became more senior, they became our clients, and that's played out really well. One of the things that we spent a lot of time looking at is diversity hiring. So um, I think within the city, certain parts of ethnic diversity landed pretty well, right? So people who might look like me, Southeast Asian, I think if you're black or Bangladeshi, I think it's tougher. Um,
Yeah.
I think there's been a huge focus on gender diversity, obviously, over the last 20 years. And although the war's not yet won, it's significantly better than it was 20 years ago. But the one thing that, again, interestingly, hasn't really changed, I think social mobility um, is still fairly monochrome in the city. And although as an Asian, I was really proud that Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister of this country, it happened sooner than I thought it would. Um, he again demographically sort of sat within that kind of elite strata by education and background, right? And so,
Yeah.
um, with the Classrooms Bordering Foundation is focused on people who initially just around London, and there are obviously a lot of schools in London that are not in privileged areas where people's qualify for a significant proportion of free school meals, or English isn't the first language in the home. And we go into schools where they come onto in the office, sponsored by a growing number of firms around skills-based workshops, CV-based workshops, interview techniques, trying to open up their sense of what the opportunity might be, which is just on their doorstep, right? But because they are where they are, it might not even register them that it's a possibility. So we've been at it for 2 years now. We've got a great team of just two people, but running on it, and we've drawn some resource from some clients and sponsoring partners and from our workplace. But it's something that I don't spend an awful lot of time doing it. It was an evolution for me giving some schools talks years ago, but it's something that I'm very happy to keep funding.
Great. Well, I'm really pleased to hear that, and I wish it continued success. Okay, last question from me, Logan, and then we'll draw to a close. But if you think back to that 20-year-old version of you, what advice would you give him if you're able to travel back to him now?
Don't worry, it will all be okay. I was a very anxious, uptight 20-year-old. So
Right.
I couldn't wait to start working. I didn't love studying, but I think I'd probably just relax and enjoy it a bit more. Right. I think the one thing that I don't have many regrets in life. I've got a couple, but when it comes to work, I started the first business when I was 25, 26, and I worked so hard for the first 6, 7 years, and I barely took any holiday. And actually, it was only in 2021 when I took my first ever 2 week holiday, even including getting married and take 2 weeks off. And actually, I don't think it helped me get to where we are today any quicker. I think I could have actually enjoyed my life a little bit more along the way.
Right.
So that's what I'd probably say to that 20-year-old. Whether
Very
I'd have
wise.
listened or not is a different matter.
Yeah, that wasn't my question. That's right. Very good. Well, Logan, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know, just pulling back the curtain a little bit, when I first approached you, I was like, well, I'm not sure if I've got anything particularly valuable to offer, but you have. And I'm really grateful for what you have shared
Thank you.
at a number of levels. And
Yeah.
thank you for joining us. I know people will find that really useful. So much appreciated.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us at the After Dinner Leadership Table, and trust that you've got good value from listening to this episode. Thanks for being here. One question for you. The question is, so what? What will you do with what you've just heard? And here's a few suggestions. Number 1, lead with more purpose. 2, mentor with patience. 3, share with pride. You think of anyone who you know that would benefit from listening to what you've just heard, that would help them to be a better leader today or in the future. Please share, like, subscribe. It helps other people to consume the content. And we wish you all the very best of success. And please listen again to another After Dinner Leadership conversation.